For 20 years, a group of Latino poets have held regular gatherings where they use verses to describe their experiences, and they call themselves Palabristas. As Vicki Adame reports, the group started as a way to include voices typically missing from the local spoken word scene.
On a warm early September evening, members of Palabristas gathered at El Colegio in Minneapolis. It was a night for sharing poetry and spoken word pieces. Larry Lucio Jr. stood in front of the group and recited some of his pieces.
Somos Palabristas, word slingers, teachers. I'm a grandson of a gun, and I want to hunt down and run down corrupt preachers who leech off of our people.
He is part of Palabristas, a core group of Latino poets who meet regularly to share their life experiences through their words. Palabristas emerged in 2002, says Lupe Castillo, the group's co-founder. The National Poetry Slam was coming to town, and she noticed that there was a voice missing from the event.
It became apparent and very overt that there was not a representation of Latinx spoken word poetry and writing artists here in the Twin Cities.
Castillo says she began having conversations with members who were involved with the event. It led to a meeting to see if there was interest in possibly collaborating. During that meeting, they began to prepare to have a presence at the National Poetry Slam. At the time, she says, they weren't thinking of the possibility of a group that would still be around 20 years down the road.
It's just like when we all came together, it was like a magnet. It was something was sparked. Well, in me for certain, and I've heard others share with me that in them as well, that once we came together and it was validated that it is not too much to ask to have voices be heard, voices be witnessed, and therefore brought to the forefront.
And earlier this month, Palabristas celebrated its 20th anniversary. Palabristas isn't what some would consider a traditional poetry group. Castillo says some see poetry as being a formal, structured writing style.
And absolutely it can be. And there's some beautiful, prolific poets in our universe, as we know. For me and, some of my palabristas, it's very organic. It can be very raw. It can be very vulnerable. And as we don't fit into a box, we don't fit into a one size of poetry style. We share our experiences in the way that feels right for us.
She says Palabristas do that through poetry and spoken word in a way that touches people's hearts. The group's members share through their writings, their views and experiences. Lucio has been a member of Palabristas since it began. He says the group taught him to see himself as part of the story. It helped him share who he is and where he's from.
There was nobody that was like me representing for me. Nobody that was like half Mexican, half white, doing spoken word, poetry, telling my story from my part of town. I'm sure they were out there, but I hadn't met them. So I thought, okay, I better step up and start representing and telling my story.
The name for the group came about after a lot of talk, Castillo says. During those conversations, she says it became clear what the group wanted for people to take away from their performances, and that was their palabras, or words.
And so for me, palabras and palabristas is very meaningful because in my cultura, there's a Nahuatl word for speaker of the people, and that is a tlatlani. And so the tlatlani is not there to change your mind. They are there to listen to the community and bring those messages to the leaders at that time, and even today to our leaders here in community.
Palabristas is more than a poetry group, she says. It works to build engagement and foster understanding of the Latino community. Vicki Adame, NPR News, Minneapolis.